gosh. Is this 123 now? Episode 123?
Yep.
Yeah.
You and me.
Wow, okay.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Oh my gosh.
Billboards
1, 2, 3 movies.
outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Oh,
There it is.
Wow.
That's why I keep you around, Zach. We are discussing three billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. I'm Christian, joined as always by Mitchell and Zach. And I think we might have an old-fashioned slugfest on our hands, but we'll see. I guess the sort of intro piece is that Mildred Hayes, played by Frances McDormand, is grieving her daughter after 7 months have passed, and she was reportedly raped while dying, and she's disappointed that the police have not made any arrests or progress in their investigation on this matter. So she fittingly purchases the rights to 3 billboards outside of Missouri, you guessed it, with a rather public protest, cleverly phrased to not technically be defamation, but basically criticizing the police for not doing more. And then what follows is a little more complicated than, I think, sort of like a straightforward mystery or procedural in terms of learning how the murder happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot more about the people rather than solving that central question. But let's hear your general thoughts and ratings out of 5, and bring it on. I can take it.
It only makes sense for Zach to go first. It
Oh.
only makes sense.
Okay.
Set the tone.
Well, I will say that this is a movie, I've seen this movie twice now. And both times that I watched it, this is a movie that I wanted to like. In 2017, when I saw this for the first time, there was a lot of Oscar buzz around this, and this wasn't the kind of movie that I would normally have watched at the time. But I think I had turned 17 not that long before this movie came out. I was now allowed to watch R-rated movies, and so I was making like deliberate attempts to expose myself to different kinds of movies. And so I deliberately sought this out, and I said I would like to watch this, and the family and I sat down and watched this actually that fall. And I was pretty disappointed in it then, and I think I'm similarly disappointed in it now. It's just a 3 out of 5 for me. And I think the reason it's a 3 out of 5 really comes down to the performances and the execution of the ideas. I quite like the story. I think the character dynamics are quite well done, and quite interesting as well. I like the way that everybody in this small town kind of interacts with each other. And I don't think it feels real, which is maybe a weakness of the film, is that this is trying to be kind of like a real drama. And to me, it feels more like the tone that you have in like Gunsmoke or an old Western or something, where there's the little town and there's the kooky guy who runs the sign shop. Ain't he a character? And that old deputy, he's always beating folks up and the sheriff has to get him in line. And that feels a little goofy to me, but I do like kind of that base way that the characters interact and everybody has pre-existing relationships. But I think, kind of bouncing off what I just said, the characters feel like they're drawn in such broad strokes, and so many scenes feel like they came straight out of an after-school special where everybody says exactly the wrong thing. And it feels, at times, this almost feels like a Dare PSA. I don't know if you guys went through Dare. Maybe I was the only one who did, but it's really overwrought at times. And a lot of the comedy,
I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I just remembered what you're talking about, Zach.
And there's also, this I think really has a tin ear for comic relief as well, where a lot of the comic relief is really grating. And I think maybe I can just boil my complaints down to, I believe Martin McDonagh is Irish. I'm realizing I've never heard him speak, but I'm pretty sure he is. And this definitely feels like a movie made by someone who really doesn't know anything about the place where he set the movie. Because a lot of my family are from Missouri. I've been to Missouri. This ain't Missouri. For the first of all, because of the mountains that this film is set next to, that's kind of a big giveaway. And that's obviously an aesthetic thing. My complaint is not there are mountains in Missouri, but that kind of landscape and this setting, which it just, that's kind of a big eyesore of like this really doesn't feel realistic to where he's trying to place it and what he's trying to say with it. And I think characters do that as well. We'll probably get around to Mac's mom, but I think I can make a real argument regarding Mac's mom for why a lot of the stuff in this movie doesn't work.
Well, I'm going to say I have no experience with Missouri. However, I agree with everything else that Zach said. I feel like the characters... First of all, I'll say I did not like this movie, plainly. I did not like it, but there were many aspects of it I consistently liked. And I'll say that the characters in general felt very larger than life. They felt like they had one or two reasons for being the way that they were. They didn't feel very nuanced to me, except probably Sam Rockwell's characters. And I wouldn't even say Mildred was honestly nuanced almost at all. And I feel like she would be the one that would have to be the most nuanced, especially because she's representing the primary victim that kind of sparked this whole thing, of whom we never really hear about at all. And I understand it's not the main point of the movie. It's more about the billboards and the principles behind the billboards, really, and the character dynamics that are around that drama in the small town. And I totally get that. But I think there's a certain callousness with the way that stereotypes are represented. I feel like the everything almost, I don't want to go as far as to say the whole film is trauma porn, but there's definitely a lot of heavily emphasized traumatic, pretty much like what Zach said, like with the Dare video. Like, why is everybody so mean? Like, why is everyone so terrible? And it's like, well, people feel like this is how people are in real life, but it's like the film's trying to ground itself in representing a certain lens of society in America, and it's also feels like a place that doesn't exist at all, and feels like these are completely just out of left field situations that are not at all representative of anything. I just feel like if you're going to have like radical like racist stereotypes for cops, or you're gonna have like the ex-husband stereotype, or like the casual guy in the bar talking about raping a girl stereotype, and it's just like they go all the way with every single stereotype, with Mildred being so hateful that it's clear that we're supposed to be okay with her committing crimes and being behind it because of what happened to her daughter, even though we don't really know about anything about her daughter at all. We have no emotional attachment other than the fact that we know that she's raging over something she has every right to be mad about, and we're just watching her trauma play out and across the entire film, very sporadically and in a not very controlled manner. And it's I can like, I like the small town vibe of it. I like the way the town is. I completely agree with Zach on all of that. I like the character dynamics. I don't really find much of anything to like in any character besides Peter Dinklage, probably, and the new chief, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
But they're obviously meant to be characters we're supposed to like, and they only have a few lines, and they have almost no influence, pretty much at all, on the main plot or Mildred's character development. And it's so painfully cynical, combined with all of these aggressive stereotypes, that I'm not really sure what the film's asking me to think about. It's bringing up things that are totally relevant in society, but they're bringing them up in such a slapdash, like heavily, like most insanely stereotypical way, that I feel like I'm not learning anything new. And I feel like the messaging is very, very overwrought and not very clear to me by the end. And that's probably my major criticism. But I think the acting is great across the board. I think pretty much everybody is well acted. I generally, like I said, I like the character dynamics, and I generally like the production. And the premise in general is a great premise. Like, I like having the billboards be somewhat of a centerpiece and guiding the discussion. I totally agree with that premise, but it's just very hard for me to get behind. It's very hard for me to latch on to any one message or try to understand what the film is really going for.
I know that Martin McDonagh came up in theater, and by the time he made this movie, he'd been making movies for a long time. But I do wonder if some of the scenes in this would work better for me on the stage, because a lot of it is very dramatized. And I think the moment in particular that to me feels like a PSA you'd see in school or something about like, be careful what you say to people. It might be the last thing you say to them, is the moment with Frances McDormand and her daughter where she says like, oh, well, I hope I get raped on the way. And she says, oh, I hope you get raped too. And it feels so, there's a way to play that in a way where it would work. But for me, it just feels so contrived that she says exactly the wrong thing in that moment. And I know what it's going for, but it just, for some reason, it doesn't feel right. It feels, this isn't the right word, but it feels too convenient that she said exactly that before her daughter was killed and raped. And this episode is absolutely going to get flagged on YouTube.
Well, where to start here? You guys have, at different points, you've drawn attention to how dramatized these moments are, but you've also suggested that there's a level of realism or groundedness here. So I guess I'll just start with saying that Ebbing, Missouri is not a real place. It's a fictional place, which I think is important to recognize. I think that alone signals that McDonagh was not exactly going for a realistic portrayal of Missouri, given that Ebbing is not a place itself. And it's interesting to hear your takes on the stylistic excess here, which I definitely grappled with at points here. But on the whole, I thought this was really great. I gave this a 4 out of 5, and it's a strong 4. I was like leaning towards a 4.5, and I settled on the 4 by the end. And in my review, I describe it as a sort of pitch black satire of what is ailing Americans today. And I think that's where I liked, or at least felt like there was a lot of praiseworthy thematic material invoked here. A strange but a real touch point for me for this is where we're talking about something that feels like it's trying super hard to be real, but it's so over the top that it obviously isn't real. Another film like this is Grease, I think. Totally different genre, perhaps. Okay. Yeah, I know. But the Randall Kleiser, the director of Grease, describes it as this over-the-top satire of what high school was like in the 50s, and this sort of over-the-top joy and macho man energy. And though I think it's true that McDonagh sort of broadly characterizes these individuals and begins with stereotypes, I think that by the end of the film, he's refuting a lot of those, most noticeably with Sam Rockwell's eventual development. But also from the beginning, I don't agree that we're meant to sympathize with Mildred the whole time. And an important pivot point for me is that first interaction she has with Woody Harrelson's character, Chief Willoughby. And I mean, we obviously feel for her in this great tragedy that she's endured. But when the chief sits with her and says they have no witnesses and no leads and no suspects, and I guess they have a file, but it's not really clear what evidence they have. I guess they have some DNA evidence from, the corpse of her daughter. But at the same time, it seems like there's not a logical springing point for the investigation. And she calls for these over-the-top standards that he sort of off-the-cuff jokes about it being a violation of civil rights law. But you see in that moment, I think it's built up to the point where we're rooting for Mildred and we're supposed to see the police as these sort of like corrupt, lazy types. But I think Woody Harrelson and eventually Sam Rockwell refute that to an extent. Before I ramble all over us, I do want to ask a more pointed question about Sam Rockwell and I guess Mildred. We can throw Mildred in here too. Sam plays Jason Dixon, and there's a plot device where Willoughby, after he commits suicide, has written letters to his wife, to Mildred, and to Jason. And those are read, and those are all kind of pivot points for each of those characters. And in his letter to Jason, he suggests that he believes Jason is basically a good person. I want to ask you guys, do you think Jason is basically a good person? Do you think Mildred is basically a good person?
I think that I really like Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell is one of my favorite actors. But I do have an issue with this character in that I don't really think he develops. To me, it doesn't really feel like development. It feels like somebody hits a light switch and he goes, "Oh my goodness, what have I done?" And then the whole back half of the film is his redemption. But I really don't feel like he earns that or necessarily like works for the opportunity to have that. He just kind of has this moment. I mean, I guess you could say him getting blown up is a catalyst for him to change his life, but I don't know, considering that it doesn't feel like he has a natural enough shift for me. It really does feel like there's just a direct pivot and then he's a better person. So I don't know if I can really answer the question because I don't know if he's written in such a way where he feels like a consistent character, at least to me. And I think Sam Rockwell and his mother are kind of another part of my kind of issue with this film and its kind of depiction of like Sam Rockwell's character, Jason's mother in the film, is played by Mac's mom from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And she is just Mac's mom. Like she looks exactly the same. And I know she's the same actress, but she looks exactly the same. She dresses exactly the same. She delivers her dialogue in the same way. She's constantly holding a cigarette in exactly the same way. She starts basically every scene on the couch in exactly the same way. And It's Always Sunny was big in 2017. So I wonder why would they choose to have her play this character in exactly this way in a serious drama? And it makes me like, does that kind of character feel real to Martin McDonagh, and that's why he wanted to include her? Is she meant to be comic relief? Because there's scenes where she's not behaving in a comedic way at all, and it just grates on me, and his whole kind of side of the narrative is part of what really doesn't feel real for me about this film.
That's an interesting thing to focus on, Zach.
It gnawed at me, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. I haven't really watched Always Sunny in that way, so I wouldn't know. I thought she was fine. I think she serves, because it's seeing somebody at work versus seeing them at home, so it offers another dynamic of Dixon's character. I will definitely offer that. I will not say that Dixon is a good person at all. We are given way more information that he's a terrible person than we are given that he's a good person. And I absolutely refuse to believe that you would turn on that much of a dime and go that out of your way to randomly sit in this. First of all, just suspending disbelief that he's in this bar at this time, and there happens to be the guy behind it. Fine, all right, fine, I accept it, right? And then he goes out of his way to get the DNA and find out, and all of a sudden be on Mildred's side. All right, fine. But I will definitely not say, after all of that time being a cop and how many scenes they had of him being very explicitly racist and being very the most terrible cop ever, he is clearly not putting on a facade. Everything he does and says to everyone is the exact wrong thing. Everything he's doing as a cop is terrible. He's not good for the department. He's not good for the town. He does nothing to help anybody except himself the entire time. So I absolutely do not believe that after a letter and getting blown up, that he would suddenly pivot and be perfectly like being on this massive journey to redeem himself. Not to mention, they're going to murder somebody for something they're not even sure he did. It's just a venge quest, and he's helping Mildred fulfill this to help her feel better about what happened to her and her daughter. So that does not. There's nothing for me that says, well, he could be a good person. I thought it was supposed to be ironic that he was getting that letter saying you could be good, because I was not thinking that at all the whole time. We are not given. Now, it's not like we aren't given any nuggets that he could be good or anything. I'm not saying he's a bad person forever, that it's permanent, or that because of what he's done, he's absolutely irredeemable. The way they attempt to redeem him is not believable to me at all. And that's my major problem.
Mm-hmm. I do think when he opens that letter, I had that initial skepticism and at least thought that maybe that was meant to portray Detective or Chief Willoughby as not as morally praiseworthy as the circumstances of his death might have suggested. I guess I just have to fall back on my satire point. I feel like this exists in sort of a weird plane that is neither reality nor complete farce. And I think the idea, at least that they're going for, and I'll certainly admit that the turn is rather abrupt, but I think a near-death experience can be similarly enlightening to people, can change people's perspective on the world. And I think the idea behind the letter to Dixon is that he's a character that was never really shown, at least to us. He was never shown love, even by his mother. There's a throwaway line at some point about how his father died and he had to go move in and take care of his mom. But most of the movie, the fact that he's living with his mom is a punchline directed at him to his detriment. And even though, like Mitchell's correctly stated, he's a hateful, terrible cop for the first half of the film, I do think there's something to this idea of humanity as a symbiotic, sympathetic thing where we feed off of one another. And does that make any of his actions okay in the first hour? Absolutely not. And maybe it's true that he's not a fundamentally good person, but I still think the exploration of that idea is very interesting. And I think it's rendered in a way within the stylistic confines of the film that does work for me.
Christian, you may have kind of covered it already within the space of that last question, but with some slight fear that I might be leading us into territory that'll lead to discussion I'll have to cut out of the podcast. You mentioned that you see this film as like a satire on the issues that burden America today. Could you maybe elaborate on what you see this being, what you see those issues as being, and how this satirizes those?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think it's a film about a sort of a failure to listen to each other. And I think at most turns, characters are assuming the worst of one another. And there are a lot of points in which both two characters or the way a character is presented to the audience sort of refutes the obvious assumption. The first and most apparent being Mildred's mourning and the aggressiveness with the billboards leads an audience to believe, oh, this police department is or at least Chief Willoughby is corrupt and he's not doing his job. But then he shows up and he presents some good points and Mildred says some bad stuff. Okay, maybe the police aren't terrible. And then we see Dixon and he's awful. And maybe we're back on Mildred's side. And then eventually Mildred frickin' throws 4 Molotov cocktails at the police department. And I'm pretty sure none of us were on Mildred's side at that point. I guess maybe it's reductive that Dixon's interactions with the black characters always seem racially tinged. And maybe it's unfair or charitable of me to say that racism can be chalked up to a failure to listen, because I do think that's a deeper sickness that maybe requires a deeper examination. But I still think I'm very moved by the idea of there being more to each of these characters, even the ones that are hateful or worthy of moral blame.
Okay.
I would say that it definitely is reductive to have the rape brought up so casually and no one being very behind trying to get it resolved just because of what you mentioned, Christian, because I totally see the satire angle. That definitely works, but I think there's so many themes that are brought up that are sensitive that are holding on to that, and I definitely feel like I'm suspending disbelief too much. I just feel like it's when you're dropping. I'm not saying like there's a certain list of things that somebody wrote out there that says you have to do this when you mention racism or you include it in your movie. You have to have X, Y, Z happen, or you're terrible and you don't understand politics and whatever. Like it's too insensitive. I don't think it's insensitive. I just think it for the sort of satire that was likely trying to be achieved. I don't think it was implemented with enough nuance, and I don't think it was. I think it was used too much as a plot device, and you don't have to get into like a bit. There doesn't have to be somebody walking out. It's like the end of the Barbie movie, and somebody has to explain the entire movie for you. Sorry for that, but somebody has to explain what the point of everything was. I'm not asking for that, but I do think that he like. It's satirical to say like all the cops in the department are either enabling or are literally racist, and then it just never gets brought up again. It's not really the point. It doesn't feel like the point of the movie for me, because the movie really does start to feel more about Mildred, especially towards the end. And Dixon is definitely like the new supporting protagonist, or I wouldn't even say protagonist, but the new supporting character in that endeavor. And it's over satirical. I think. I just think the real nail in the coffin is them going like at the very end to go murder that guy. It's just like I get it. It's completely unhinged to every point possible, but I'm not really learning anything from that. I feel like we've hit a point where if the whole point was so we can finally listen to each other, why are we still trying to murder someone? Like I just don't understand. Like it keeps going. Like there's no conclusion. There's no hope. It's complete 100% cynicism. Like I don't feel good. I don't feel good about Sam Rockwell's character. I don't feel good about it. And maybe that wasn't the point, right? I don't have to feel good about the ending or feel good about them or sympathize with them or anything. But it just doesn't leave me with anything to care about. It makes me feel like, well, everybody just hates each other. Everyone at the end of the day just hates each other. And even if they do listen to each other, they're still going to be terrible anyway because humanity sucks. And that's the point I got. So that... I can see. I know what you're saying, though. I see the satirical. Angle, and I think it's fairly consistent now that you're bringing it up. But I just there's too much hinging on it for me.
I will say, I don't necessarily think it's entirely successful in using satire and the angle that you've kind of laid out, Christian.
Yeah,
I do agree with Mitchell that maybe it is a bit too broad, and I do wonder if it's going for the same message with such serious subject matter, what maybe even the point is in applying that satirical of a lens to something that could have been played straight. But I do at least see what you're saying, and I see your viewpoint.
I'll take it. I'm glad you brought up the ending, Mitchell. I want to ask, so I guess there's this exchange where Dixon is sort of reinvigorated in the investigation, and then he finds out that this suspect, who was not a DNA match, lives in Idaho and probably raped someone because he's bragging about it at the bar, and it could be this revenge kill for them. And they're driving there, and Mildred turns to him and asks how he feels about doing it, and he says he doesn't feel sure, and she says she doesn't feel sure, and they say they'll decide on the way, and that's the ending of the film. Did you guys... I guess Mitchell kind of already answered this, but Zach, do you think that they're going to kill this guy?
I think when I first saw this movie, I didn't know what to think about that. Now I think the ending is, if the theme of the film is that anger begets further anger, then perhaps the point of the ending and the intention of the ending is that curiosity and self-reflection and kind of self-questioning can potentially lead to the beginning of the end of that anger. They like may kill the guy, they may not, but they're at least going to think about it. And I think the point is that that's a step in the right direction, as like a microcosm for the larger issues that the film is talking about. Now, I think that's kind of a tin-eared metaphor and doesn't entirely work on all the levels it's being applied for, if that is the point. But I think that's the purpose of the ending.
It's like we're starting from square negative 10,000 and we've gone to negative 9,999. It's basically what it feels like.
Maybe it is just freaking bleak as heck, because the only other McDonagh film I've seen is the Banshees of Inisherin, and that I think that ending is perhaps more bleak than this ending. And
really?
Also, at least in my opinion, I don't know. It's been a minute since I saw it, but I think it also deals with similarly harsh themes about human relationships. But I
like Banshees more than I like this, I will say.
It's close for me. I think I'd need to rewatch to give a ruling on that. And just to sort of close the circle on the satire going too far, I do think maybe a valid criticism of this film is the way it handles its black characters. Clark Peters as Abercrombie shows up as the chief that's going to fix everything, and he's like immediately disrespected by Dixon, and then he takes him down a peg. And like Mitchell said, he's written to exist to be kind of purely good, and as such, he's kind of a one-dimensional character. And Amanda Warren plays Denise, who is Mildred's friend who works at the store with Mildred, and basically the only thing that happens with her is she's arrested on a marijuana charge, which may or may not have been legitimate, and then she gets let go. And to me, that feels like a pretty uncharitable, generic way to use her as a character. And there is one other
Jerome.
Yes, and he's the one that helps put up the billboards, which I guess is kind of interesting. But
and immediately goes out on a date with the one other young black person in the movie.
Yeah. So I think if I'm trying to sort of ascribe this film a grand title of dissecting America, if in a big satirical, offensive way, I still think that maybe its handling of the race matters is a little fishy.
It's interesting that the new sheriff, now that you mention it, really feels like a Sidney Poitier character. Because that was a complaint of his and of his critics at the time when he was a big star, was that the only way that he'd really be accepted as a black mainstream star in Hollywood was if he played these basically flawless characters where sure, he's black, but he's to the white audiences, he's the perfect black man. He's not like the other black men you might see on the street. And maybe, I mean, this film isn't like that single-minded in its views, but I mean, I would be willing to bet that Sidney Poitier was probably on the mood board for that character in casting.
I'll also say one more thing on the anger begets anger thing. It shows you have to make like 5 massively illegal or morally reprehensible mistakes before you get to the next thing. It's like you're making, in order to take 1 step forward, you have to take 5 steps backwards, and then 3 steps forwards, and then 7 steps backwards. So it's like, I guess my criticism with that would be, it's very forward. All the characters are very forward developing and are kind of, it's like one thing's building off another sequentially. It's like the last thing that happened to them and then what they're going to do next is all that defines their character. It doesn't really feel like anything before mattered, or like any of the mistakes they made before mattered, even though it may or may not be heavily indicative of their character and may have to be questioned or fought head on later on, which is kind of my thing with Dixon. But I will say I really liked Abercrombie, and I thought he was going to be used a lot more.
Me too.
I thought he would be like, his first entrance was totally fine with the expectation that he would contribute a lot more or be like change some aspect of the department or we'd learn more about the department, and it just doesn't really go in that direction. But
that is really...
and he seems...
Oh no, go ahead, Christian.
I was just going to say he was very open to bringing back Dixon on the investigation, at least in an unofficial manner. He doesn't seem like he's excluding him.
Yeah. His introduction is a really well blocked shot, I will say, because that whole shot, it isn't really like his introduction, but there's the whole bit where Dixon goes up into the office and chucks Red out of his office onto the street and then walks back down, and that's all one continuous shot. And then at the end of that shot, you see who at the time is just, there's a black man drinking a coffee, and then right at the end of the shot, after Dixon has like sworn at him and gone inside, he kind of puts his hand on his belt and reveals the badge, and that's a great little button onto the end of that shot. That is a really well done moment, I will say.
Yeah, I'm gonna start citing your reviews for the remainder of this interrogation.
Oh God.
Mitchell, you cited poorly handled plot devices in your review. Alas. I did want to ask you guys a little bit more about the letters. I know we've kind of touched on Dixon and how we felt that was maybe abrupt, but there is this letter to Mildred and this letter to his wife. I guess I want to ask you guys, how do you think his suicide plays? I think there's ideas of what makes a person selfish versus selfless here. I mean, obviously he's in a position of service as an officer, but maybe there's an argument that his suicide was selfish given his wife and his children, or and I think there's similar ideas of selfishness or not with Mildred and her son basically reliving this trauma every time they drive by the billboards, as much as he's tried to avoid information about the death of his sister. So I guess, what do you make of the letters? What do you make of Willoughby's suicide, and any other, I guess, pivotal plot devices that you can think of?
Well, everything with Willoughby is actually the stuff that works the most for me in the movie, because I think Willoughby and the letters and his suicide, his kind of whole side story as a character, is the only place really where the movie feels like it embraces its status as a genre film, because that character archetype is straight out of a Western. He's the aging lawman, this one last case that he was never able to solve, and that burdens him, but time has caught up with him earlier than he thought it would. And I like the letters as a framing device for the rest of the film. I like his suicide and when it happens in the film, and how that has an impact on the rest of the narrative and the rest of the characters and how they relate to each other. And I think it's also led up to in a really satisfying way. When I saw this for the first time, I wasn't expecting it, but you know, when you go back and you see him going through this, like, oh, we're gonna have this game, and I'm gonna make love to my wife one last time, put her to bed on the couch, like that all really feels like great establishment for that moment. And when he puts the bag over his head, that is very shocking. Though one wonders what he would have done if his wife had agreed to take care of the horses, and he hadn't had to go up to the stables. I do think Woody Harrelson, for the role he is playing and for that archetype, is maybe a bit too young. I like Woody Harrelson, but I think for that beleaguered part of, because Willoughby is kind of like the linchpin that holds the whole town together, and he knows everybody. He knows Jason does some bad stuff, but the boy's got heart, and I want to guide him, and I feel like I owe him something. And he kind of like holds the whole town together and seems to be very well liked. And I feel like maybe kind of an older actor who had more of a feel of having been around for longer could have sold that a little more to me. When I think of that, I think of like Tommy
Sam
Lee
Elliott.
Jones in No Country for Old Men. I think would very much have the age of like, I know this town, I've been here forever, I know everyone, and without him, what are we gonna do? It's like the town elder just vanished. But at the same time, then elements of like his family and how young his daughters are wouldn't work as well.
Yeah.
So
I don't like the cancer angle. I was going to say, I think that was the reason why the cancer was a part of it, so he would die a lot more soon. I'm going to make a terrible comparison. I think Christian's going to hate me for this, but he's going to feel a little twinge. Are you ready for this comparison? 13 Reasons Why. It reminds me of 13 Reasons Why, Christian. And the reason why is because the whole premise of the show is that this girl who has almost no attention at all. Well, she has no attention. She's not very popular beforehand, so it doesn't totally work. But when she commits suicide and she leaves all these tapes, that's kind of like making this massive drama in the school, and everybody's like completely affected by it. The whole show is about somebody who already committed suicide and just had these different tapes that were left. And definitely it's something that's been done before, and I generally like the wording of the letters. It tells, I like learning about a character even after they've passed away by them leaving like evidence of their life before and us learning more about them when they're gone versus when they were alive. I like that. I generally like that. I agree with Zach. I think he was probably the best like set up character. It was somebody that you almost actually felt like you could have like sympathy for, even though you feel more like he was naive and narrow-minded than he was somebody who was like inherently a terrible person. And I find that a lot more intriguing about him compared to literally almost every other character. But in terms of the letter plot device thing, I think I've already gone over with Dixon. Not a huge fan of it. I think it doesn't really affect much with Mildred necessarily. I mean, I feel like it was almost intended to have some effect on her opinions or on her way of carrying herself and just being a nicer person, I guess, or having some sympathy, but I don't think it really gives her that at all. Maybe that was the intention. But I just feel like the letters were written so thoroughly and had so much time spent on them that I felt like they'd be a lot more impactful in general. And that's why I kind of felt another reason why they would feel kind of out of place or misused. But conceptually, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. I'm trying to think of the plot devices we haven't mentioned. I feel like, well, I mean, obviously the billboards are a big one. I would say that the billboards are used the most effectively out of any of them. I think obviously being the title of the movie and being kind of the pivoting point of all of the drama and having like it being burned down by her ex-husband and then having that kind of glimmer of hope with Jerome and Denise and James putting them back up and everything. I just feel like it was, and now the whole town seeing it also. I feel like it kind of lends to that small town mentality. So I think it ultimately is pretty interesting. We haven't mentioned Red as a character at all, and I feel like he was a pretty good reference point. I feel like it was kind of inevitable that his gatekeeping of the advertising was going to go down fairly quickly. Kind of like Heimdall and Asgard. It's like he becomes fairly useless fairly quickly. But yeah. Also, Nixon just beating the crap out of him and throwing him out the window. I don't think anybody is a good person if they do that. But
yeah, that's a very fair point. I'm quoting an old review I wrote for a Kurosawa film. Kurosawa makes me aware of what I want out of film, and what I want are moments that mean something more than their sum. And I think an example of that, a moment that sort of stands on its own in a beautiful way, is Willoughby's letter to his wife. I think it's a very beautiful testament. It's realistic in the way that it feels very deeply thought out and loving, but it doesn't sort of embellish Willoughby's vocabulary or make him overly didactic.
Yeah.
And I like how he reserves the fact that there's a whole separate letter to sort of devoted to their long-term love and their relationship, and that this is just a letter for this evening. That sort of functioning as preserving some of their privacy away from the audience. I really like that. I think his letter to Mildred, I think it's certainly questionable whether it changes the way Mildred conducts herself or the way she feels sympathy for other people. But I do think it at least makes her aware of the fact that her flashy decision to put up the billboards does affect people. Obviously, it's not why he killed himself. He says as much in the letter. But and he, of course, pays to keep them up as a sort of joke to her or against her. But it's still just sort of a shocking moment that reinforces the idea that one can't really assume everything about the person opposite you. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, gosh. I was going to say something else about Mildred. And I want to credit you guys. There are a couple moments that push the shtick too far for me. Was not a fan of the CGI deer scene myself.
Oh my god. Oh my.
That was also like, I feel like generally the visuals of this movie are fine, but there's like one scene where she's like looking off in the distance, and I'm like, that's definitely a green screen. And
The slippers.
yeah, that was just odd. And the scene where she like kicks the crotches of these like high school students.
That was like a
is
cartoon.
so far out of left field. Yeah. So, and to me, I mean, I don't think those moments work for me at all, but I do think they perhaps suggest the satire angle, if nothing else.
All right. I don't. If you're talking about rape and racism in the same movie that she's doing that, I think we're stretching the bounds a bit, Christian.
I do think you can do that in a satire, but it's all about the handling. I think that this movie does have kind of a hot hand, a beefy hand. I've lost whatever phrase I was going to use, but a heavy hand when it comes to the balance of the satire and the drama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like we're winding down here. Yeah. I'm a fan of the short episode. I will just ask a quick question of Zach. In your review, you said that the third act does gain some cohesion, and I wanted to ask if there was a more specific reference point where you felt like it came more together towards the end.
Well, I think during the last act, when Dixon gains his direction and decides, okay, well, I'm going to do this and this and this to try to get a hold of the guy's DNA, and then I'm going to test it. I'm going to let, I'm going to let the police know. That all feels like it has direction and is going somewhere. And I will say the third act all feels like it's part of the same movie. I don't necessarily like it all in relation to the first two acts, and I don't necessarily think it all gels. But if I were to turn on that third act on FX on a Sunday afternoon, I would probably go, wow, I need to watch the first two acts of this movie. I think it kind of gels towards the conclusion in a way that the first two acts don't really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, Peter Dinklage was thrown in there to be called midget like 6 times.
Yeah. And he gets
they could have cut it down like to 3 or something.
He gets no conclusion at all other than walking away sad from a failed dinner date.
But I will support Christian's satire angle here. I think he really having that kind of almost like an angel kind of metaphor where he's kind of like entering her life just for a little bit to like show her what she could be considering or like what normal life could be like, even though I'm like a midget and I'm different, and it's just kind of giving her a little bit of that realism and just like a little tidbit. Mm-hmm. And I think that was utilized really well. I think him kind of being haphazardly just thrown in near the fire, just like being in the middle of town for pretty much no reason at all, was a little weird. But I think him trying to excuse his being there with her and having that little like date just because that happened, I thought that was a neat little thing to come out of it. And I just thought that he was generally utilized well in that case.
Yeah.
That moment does result in what I think is the worst line of dialogue on the whole movie, though, which is where the new sheriff walks up and says, "Are you two boyfriend and girlfriend?"
Yeah, that was
like, are we 12? What is
I think an investigator would ask a question to that effect, and then they get an answer like the one
they were like
get.
in a relationship.
Yeah.
But like boyfriend girlfriend is such like an immature way to say that.
I want to really quickly. Sorry, I want to address another good thing is because the good thing, Christian will let me talk now because the small town police investigation thing feels very believable, like kind of saying we've tried everything we can when the chief is talking to Mildred about it and saying like we went through everything, like what else can we do, like genuinely what else could they actually do? I mean, it's not like they have infinite resources or anything. Like Zach's mentioned a couple times, it feels like a Western, and I really like that kind of angle because the police department having all of the power and also having zero power at all is a very nuanced, interesting aspect, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is just like a festival of bleakness the more we talk about it. But I still think there's a lot to chew on here. I'm glad you guys brought up Peter Dinklage. And I think maybe the earliest moment where we feel sort of detached from Mildred as a moral person is when she sort of wanders back into her home drunk, and she's like, I think that midget wants to get in my pants. And at least for me, I took a big step back, and that was maybe the earliest moment where I was like, oh, yikes.
Do you know who you're talking
she's
to?
not that great. Yeah, this is Peter Dinklage. Come on. But then, and there's this, and then of course she turns around and the priest is in her house and like lecturing her about the billboards. And I think maybe another like big thematic moment for me is her speech then to this priest, citing, I guess, a law that was brought into effect where if you're a member of a gang and you're present at a gang activity, you are culpable. And okay, whether we subscribe to the idea of this morality or not, and she's certainly making broad assumptions about the priest and his own associations. But I still think it's another interesting idea thrown into the mix, especially talking about Willoughby as sort of the more moral or cohesive character in all of this. There's a suggestion that he's enabling Dixon, which I think is a pretty considerable question to Willoughby's own judgment and perhaps character. So another note there. This is very bleak. Amazon, where we sometimes we touch on genre here, and in the Amazon genre description for this, it says drama, comedy, cerebral, tense, which make of that what you will. I guess
that's a hell of a soup.
Yeah, that's all I got. I don't know if you guys have closing comments, but now's the time.
It was an interesting watch. I disliked it a lot more than I thought it would, and I really did enjoy the premise and every idea that's kind of established about the small town is generally very interesting to me, and the character dynamics. I just think the way the stereotypes are handled and the way the plot is pushed forward is kind of it just doesn't give a lot to grasp onto, in my opinion, and I think it's hard to understand where the satire begins and ends, and it's hard to feel like there's an end goal for any of the characters, because there's so many different things happening to them at once, and it feels like only like one. I mean, I get it, like a life altering event like getting nearly burned alive definitely changes your perspective on things, right? But if you're going to embed somebody as being that terrible in that many different ways, then a little bit more of a lead in, or maybe even a little bit more like insight about how he was raised besides just his interactions with his mom, maybe. I think adding more nuance to the characters and getting a little bit to sympathize with, that even goes far to say, would lend a lot more to the satire that's trying to be achieved, I think. Because I don't think taking out the satire would do the movie any good at all. I think it's just the way that it's executed for me.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm glad I returned to it. I'm glad I gave it a rewatch, knowing what I know now about film and having more experience with writing and reading and just in life in general. 3 out of 5. I doubt I'll return to it very soon, but I am glad I saw it again, and I don't think that my middling feelings towards this impact my general feelings of Martin McDonagh at all. I still like In Bruges. I really liked Banshees of Inisherin. This is just kind of a flat note for me, let's say.
Fair enough. I feel like we haven't done Week in Review in forever, man. My goodness.
Maybe it has been a while, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like throw cold water on my face or something before doing this.
Well, yeah, this week, this is kind of a surprise Week in Review. We didn't expect to be doing a Week in Review this episode, and then suddenly we were. So true. I'm going to talk about an episode of a show I watched right before we recorded, because lately I have been watching the show Hammer, House of Mystery and Suspense. We've watched... That
sure sounds like a Zach show.
Yes. We've watched Curse of Frankenstein on the show, but that might be the only Hammer thing we've ever watched for this podcast. But
did we not do Dracula too?
I don't know if we did. I think we've all seen Dracula, but anyway, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Hammer was a very successful British production company, but during the mid-70s, they started to flag. Their ticket sales weren't doing as well as they were. And so during the 80s, a couple of producers kind of bought out the Hammer name and tried to bring them back as a force for television. So there was a Hammer anthology series called Hammer House of Horror, which was quite successful. And I think I talked about that way back in season 2. I thought it was okay. And then based on the success of Hammer House of Horror, they decided to do a second run of anthology stories, and that was going to be Hammer House of Mystery and Suspense. And for the first time in decades, they had the partnership of an American company in making the show, because 20th Century Fox signed on. They had a distribution deal with Fox in America, so this came out in America as Fox Mystery Theater. And there are a lot of kind of American TV stars in various episodes, but that kind of ended up being a blessing and a curse, because at the 11th hour, 20th Century Fox went, oh, you can make these feature length, right? Because we want to put these on a TV movie slot with ads. And so every episode at the last minute had to be written up to 70 minutes, and you can really tell. The episode that I watched today is called Checkmate, Czech spelled as in from the Czech Republic. But every episode is kind of like an Alfred Hitchcock Presents or a Twilight Zone type thing. They're generally fairly mysterious, but they're like 25 or 30-minute concepts that have been blown up to feature length. There's tons of padding. They go on forever. The endings a lot of the time are just kind of sort of mysterious shrugs that would work if the episode was 25 minutes or 30 minutes, but don't work at 70. And it's a shame because the show bombed as a result, and did not get a second series, and Hammer went into total obscurity for another 30 years until they made The Woman in Black in like 2009. Yeah, it's kind of just a big disappointment. I had been looking for this show for a long time because it was very hard to find on home media and streaming for ages. And now I'm watching it perhaps semi-illegally on Dailymotion, where somebody has uploaded every episode. But if I'm honest, I doubt anybody cares, because nobody seems to have any memory of these episodes. And it's a shame, but yeah, it's not very good. I think maybe the biggest mistake is in trying to rebrand as Mystery and Suspense. Hammer kind of neutered their own greatest strength, which was this gothic horror atmosphere with, you know, spooky castles and Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster, and dropping that fantasy horror in favor of kind of more spy and conspiracy related stories just isn't really Hammer's bread and butter. It wasn't in the 70s when they weren't making money on their movies and were trying to desperately find new genres to move into, and it wasn't in the 80s either. So a non-recommend for Hammer House of Mystery and Suspense. I suppose the last 3 or 4 episodes there might be a gem in there, but I kind of doubt it at this point.
You know, if I hum first, that automatically gives me the privilege to go next. Did you know that?
I did. It's codified in the Cookie Pocket code.
It's faster to hum than it is to open your mouth and say a word. Pro strat. Well, I haven't consumed any media the past month and a half because I've been studying for my Cisco Certified Network Associate exam. I can give a very brief advice.
What's the rating out of 5 for the exam?
Out of 5.
For the workbook that you studied from.
Wendell Odom, the Wendell Odom Official Certification Guide, Volume 1 and 2, Zachary. I will say the exam was a 3 out of 5. I didn't save my configuration on the first lab, because when you're configuring the different devices in the lab, because there's 3 labs part of it, you have to do a command that saves all of your progress, and I did not do that. So one of my categories for the exam was literally 50% because I did not do that. Another one was that I was trying to use the IP route command, and because I didn't configure the IPv6 address correctly, it kept trying to search for it, and it was endlessly sending packets throughout the network, and I could not quit out of it, so I couldn't save my progress on that either. But the multiple choice was either really easy or really hard. I recommend it for anyone that is looking for a career in cybersecurity. I would definitely recommend, if you don't know anything, starting with CompTIA's A+ exam, which is 2 exams actually, that will teach you everything about like basic IT stuff. And then after that, I would go for your Security Plus, which is like a DoD standard that's accepted like for every job for cybersecurity ever. Highly recommend doing that. It covers all the bases. And then you want to get into networking, so either do your Net Plus or you do the CCNA, which is a Cisco cert. And it actually has you configure stuff during the exam and teaches you about configuring Cisco devices. So I definitely recommend the CCNA for anybody that's going in that career path. So 3 out of 5 for that exam.
In 5 seasons, I think that's the only useful information we've ever imparted. I have no idea what I'm going to use as a graphic for this bit of the YouTube version of the episode.
Just look up CCNA and logo.
Yeah, Zach, you've definitely just been dethroned for most unique week in review ever. Wow. How to follow that? With David Lynch, who else?
Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
Back to
I watched Eraserhead the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Though, if I were to be completely honest, I probably watched like 80% of Eraserhead because I kept like looking away because it was so hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that as a real compliment. I'm starting to understand the Lynchian mindset and the misconception that David Lynch is just like this weird jerk or something. I mean, he's weird, but I do think his films have, if unconventional, an underlying humanity about them that is deeply affecting, Eraserhead being a great example of that. I think a sort of common description of Eraserhead is that it's about the horrors of fatherhood. I think it's that and the horrors of merely existing. I think a lot of the sort of scary elements are presented as both otherworldly and completely familiar to the audience member, that being the genius sound design, which is mostly composed of familiar industrial sounding drones and the cries of a baby and, the interrogations of your in-laws and the like. And it was, this is really kind of a triggering and hellish film, but I also very deeply admire it and understand what he was going for. And I'm glad I watched it. I gave it a 4.5. This sits in the sort of weird Schindler's List 4.5 zone where it's like totally worth seeing. Not sure I have like a clear criticism of it, but something I don't really want to revisit and would not describe as enjoying. But this was really great. This was profound. That it was made in 1977 only makes it even all that more impressive, because I don't really have a touch point for this at all. One of those rare movies that really stands alone in what it does and how it does it. I was impressed, Zach. I was.
The story behind making Eraserhead is really fascinating as well, because it took like 7 years to make. David Lynch slept in the stables where they shot it for a lot of the production because he put all his money into the movie. He didn't have the money to pay rent. I've always thought, like, you've got to wonder what it's like to be David Lynch's daughter and watch Eraserhead and know that to at least a certain extent the movie is about you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the sort of beautiful thing about that, though, is that it's actually a natural impulse or a natural fear. I think it's totally normal for a new parent to be absolutely terrified or to be worried that they're going to do everything wrong. And there is this reality that when your child is initially born, they look ugly, like coming out the womb. And there is this sort of like uncanny grasping one has to do with the whole thing. So even though you're right, it's probably disturbing to be his child and watch the film, I think maybe viewing it with more perspective, you might understand that his fear comes from, at least to me, it comes from a place of genuine care, which makes it more interesting.
Yeah. And that song by the Radiator Woman is really beautiful as well. And really catchy.
Okay. We're back in the fictional town of Ebbing. And Zach has to run.
Yes.
He gave this a 3, even though he criticized it a lot, guys. I'm telling you.
Sam Rockwell goes for white people too, and he's coming for you, Zach.
Yep, I better leave my sign shop.
All right, I'll start.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, Mitchell will start. Right. In 3, 2, 1, go.
3 billboards that are outside Ebbing, Missouri.
3 out of 5.
The Lady with the Funny Eye.
4 out of 5.
Fat Dennis.
2 out of 5.
Gang Culpability.
2 out of 5.
Book called Suck My Butt, It's None of Your Business.
2 out of 5.
Caring About Dentists.
3 out of 5.
Equating street gangs with going to church.
3 out of 5.
Counterproductive to the entire operation.
4 out of 5.
The Torturing Business.
2 out of 5.
Talking to a CGI deer.
2 out of 5.
Rice Krispies in the hair.
3 out of 5.
Peter Dinklage's jacket.
4 out of 5.
Freaking Donald Sutherland season.
Oh, 4 out of 5.
Orange Juice.
2 out of 5.
Oscar Wilde.
4 out of 5.
Max Mom.
4 out of 5.
Banshee Abuse.
2 out of 5.
Penelope Said Begets.
3 out of 5.
Crotch Destruction.
4 out of 5.
How Things Are Coming Along.
3 out of 5.
Technically Arson.
4 out of 5.
1 second, Peter Dinklage as himself.
4 out of 5.
Time.
Yes. Yes. We had
I
to
did
get
want to
that.
mention, this is just a bit thing, but I'm glad it came up in the rundown. When I saw this movie in 2017, I absolutely didn't know what Donald Sutherland movie they were talking about. And now I know they're talking about Don't Look Now, which is quite appropriate based on what the movie is about.
I was gonna say I saw a theory that the dentist was the one that raped her daughter, and
Oh.
makes a whole lot of sense if you think about it.
Oh my
Huh.
gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
I had never thought about that through that lens. That's interesting.
Oh, that is interesting.
You can thank
Yeah.
Reddit for that one.
Yeah, I do think that. Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't dig into that scene because it's the ambiguity of the whole. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Mhm,
Anyway, moving on. Who's next?
Mitchell is next.
Oh, what was I doing again? Oh,
Uh,
Stalingrad.
Yes.
Stalingrad. I haven't seen this film. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I believe it's a German-made film, and I know almost nothing
Oh.
else. I've seen that meme when he's talking to all the troops and everything. Man, who stars in this? I don't know anything, but we're gonna find out how it goes. The last time we did Downfall, right? We actually did that for an episode, right?
I don't
Or
think
did
we
never
did.
did
I don't
it?
think
Oh,
we
we did
did.
it for
Watch
Week in
that.
Review. We did it for Week in Review. We all talked
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I was trying to look for German-made World War II films, and this was one of the well-rated ones that was fairly recent. So we'll see how it goes.
I think we watched
Interesting.
Schindler's List. No. What did we watch the night we watched Downfall? It was like a very
Pianist?
depressing. I
it
think
The
we
Pianist?
Watched the Churchill movie with
Yes.
someone.
the TV one.
There's
Yeah,
a couple.
Yeah.
with Albert Finney.
And
Before
Enemy
the,
at the
Before the
Gates.
Storm,
Yes,
I think it was Before
Yeah.
the Storm, or
Yeah, that
no,
was it.
Gathering the Storm. There it is.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Got you. All right.
Well, all right. I had never even heard of this movie until Mitchell said that we were going to be talking about it. So this is definitely a deep cut. It's the Das Boot of Stalingrad movies, I guess. Well,
Yes.
whether or
Yes,
not
it
that's
is.
appropriate, we'll see.
Yes. I never heard of it either. So,
All right.
all right. Join us next time for more war.
Yay.